Well, welcome to Lent. We're going to be spending the next 5 weeks, 6 weeks, however many Sundays there are in Lent with an unnamed blind man. In the 9th chapter of the Gospel of John, it's the longest scene that we have in any of the Gospels. And we're going to go line by line through this story over the next 6 weeks. This week, we are starting with verses 1 through 7. And so if you were hoping to show up to church this morning and get some great vision for what Lent is going to be, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Because Lent begins in the darkness. Not just the gloomy darkness outside right now, but an actual darkness. From the ashes of Wednesday to the coming alleluias of Easter, we get to walk with this blind man. We're going to move deliberately, and we're going to allow the space necessary for his story to become ours. Because more and more often than not, these stories in our Gospels are a mirror, and they tell us something about ourselves. John gives us a microcosm of discipleship, and eventually we will see with this man, as he sees clearly. We will confess our faith as he confesses his, and we will worship. But today we begin with blindness. And the story doesn't begin with compassion. It begins with a theological debate. The disciples want to know, Rabbi, who sinned? Why is this man blind? Was it the man? Did he do something wrong and God is punishing him? Or did his parents do something wrong and God is punishing the child? Every parent's worst nightmare, because we know how often we screw up. And we don't want our screw-ups to affect our children. The disciples want an explanation. They need a culprit. And we're not any different. When something goes wrong, when we don't like something, when we are uncomfortable, we want to assign blame. We want to know where this suffering has come from. And we would rather a bad explanation than to admit that we don't understand something. Sometimes the disciples' questions sound like the question that is floated to a preacher after a sermon left the congregation feeling unsettled. Rabbi, who sinned? Is not all that different from Pastor. What exactly were you saying? Translation, who messed this up? Your mouth or my ears? And I'm betting on your mouth. Why did you have to go there? Why can't you just be more uplifting like that pastor I see on TV with better hair and whiter teeth? Now listen, not every irritated post-worship question is a bad question. Faith seeks understanding. But sometimes the questions we ask, they're not about clarity, they're about control. If we can locate fault outside of ourselves for what makes us uncomfortable, if we can assign guilt and smooth everything out, then the world will feel more stable again. If suffering has a culprit, and that culprit's not us, then the system will still work. If the sermon has a mistake, and it's the preacher's fault, then we don't have to allow the sermon to examine us. But Jesus does not answer the disciples' question in the way they or we want. He's not going to protect their categories or tidy up our discomfort. He refuses their premise outright. It was not that the man sinned or his parents were off the hook, but that the works of God might be displayed through the man. In other words, stop trying to decode suffering as though it were a puzzle to solve. This blindness cannot be distilled into an equation. A plus sin does not equal blindness. And sometimes the most faithful, the most graceful thing Christ can do is not explain away the tension, but invite us to stand in the tension long enough for our own vision to be changed. And that can feel like mud, spit mud in your eyes, Ever before it feels like 2020 vision. Without asking for permission, without forming a committee, Jesus hocks a loogie on the ground, makes mud and smears it all over this man's face. This healing was not requested. The man did not ask for Jesus' loogie mud. There was no confession. The man is the center of attention, and before he knows it, he has spit all over his face. And then Jesus says, "Go and wash." Now, you or I might say, "Thank God. Let me get this off my face." But the man just goes. That's it. There's no guarantee. He goes without an explanation for what's about to happen. He's still blind when he goes. He's walking through town to this pool that I can't pronounce, and I'm glad Christian did a much better job than I could. Walking past neighbors and family and skeptics with mud across his face. He just goes. And then somewhere between the mud and the water, his obedience becomes sight. That, friends, is Lent. It doesn't begin with sight. It begins with obedience while we were still in the dark. This past Wednesday, we came forward and we allowed a sinner to rub smudges of ash onto our foreheads. As you came forward, no one asked if you fully understood your own mortality or if you had truly repented. The ashes were placed on your forehead and you were told the truth. You are but dust, but with one T, and to dust you shall return. It's not a pep talk. It's a mark. The ash on your forehead is the same as the mud in the blind man's eyes. Neither was asked for, but both are invitations. We prefer understanding before we go to obedience. We all want clarity before we're willing to make a commitment. Jesus is not giving us a strategic plan for transformation with measurable outcomes and reviews. In the church, we call reviews a testimony. A testimony from someone who's already tried it, who's already had the spit mud placed on their eyes and gone to the pool. But in John 9, obedience comes first. The blind man acts before he believes, which offends most of our modern sensibilities. Because after all, we all have degrees. If you don't have a theology degree, you have Google. And I know you have Google because you tell me, "Hey, Pastor, I Googled this. You're wrong." We think that we're not blind. That is why Lent begins with admitting that we are. We don't see our own pride clearly. We are blind to how fear drives our decisions and how quickly we assign blame. We don't see how tightly we cling to control. The disciples and we think we see. We have our theological categories, and we have our answers. The only one not pretending in this first part of the 9th chapter of John is the blind man. And he's the one who will end up worshiping by verse 41. There's something else that matters for us during this season of Lent. I want you to realize that this healing happens outside of the synagogue, happens outside of the temple, meaning it happens outside of the religious centers of power and control. By verse 41, this man will be completely cast out of his religion, out of his temple, out of his synagogue. His sight is going to cost him something, which means that first step towards the pool is the first step in a journey that will take him outside the gates. And when you step outside the gates, that's usually where you'll find Jesus. Lent is not a season of self-improvement. It is the time when we follow Jesus, where our visibility is at its most low and our control is limited. It's walking to the pool to wash with muddy eyes, and you can't see where you're going. We're going to stick with this blind man. We're going to watch him struggle in his explanation of what happens. He's going to be misunderstood, interrogated, abandoned, and thrown out of his community. As this unfolds, we will see that his vision becomes sharper and sharper. At first, he will say, the man called Jesus. Next, he will call Jesus a prophet. Eventually, he's going to say, Lord, I believe, and he will worship. That is our movement for the season of Lent. From confession to courage to costly witness to worship. But today we begin with spit mud and the command to go. The man doesn't see the water when he begins walking, he just walks. And friends, that's faith. Lent doesn't begin in the dark because God delights in confusion, but because that is where trust is formed. The man is seen by God before he ever sees. Grace precedes his understanding. The call of God precedes clarity. Just ask anyone who's ever responded to God's call in their life. That means the same is true for you. You might feel half-seeing or spiritually muddy. You may feel uncertain about what the season of Lent will bring for you. But you have been seen and you have been told to go. So together we will walk with the remnants of ashes pressed into the pores of our foreheads and with mud still caked on our eyes. We're going to walk towards the water with some of our questions unanswered, trusting that somewhere between the mud and the washing, Christ will give us sight. Amen.